हेलो एंड गुड इवनिंग, यू वाचिंग द पॉलिसी टाइम्स। पॉलिसी टाइम्स भारत का ऐसा पहला एक मीडिया है जो पॉलिसी और प्रोग्रेस को लगातार प्रमोट करते हुए आ रहे हैं। आज तक हमने जो भी शो करते हैं, एपिसोड करते हैं, उसका एक मिशन होता है कि उसके जरिए हमारे देश को, हमारे समाज को, सोसाइटी को किस तरह से एक फायदा मिले, ये एक हम कंट्रीब्यूट कर सकें। और जब हम देश की बात करते हैं तो देश का आधा आबादी हमारे महिला हैं, वीमेन। और भारत, ऐसा रिसर्च कहती है कि भारत अगर हमारे विमेन फोर्स को उनकी जितना पोटेंशियल है उसको एक्सप्लोर किया जाए तो हमारी जीडीपी लगभग डबल रेट पे ग्रो कर सकती है और हमारी जीडीपी डबल हो सकती है। दैट शोज द काइंड ऑफ पोटेंशियल वी हैव विद द वुमेन वर्कफोर्स। और इस विमेन जो पोटेंशियल है, इसको अनलिश करने के लिए कुछ एक्सपर्ट्स और थिंकर्स ने मिलके एक विकी नाम के एक चैम्बर ऑफ कॉमर्स खोला है, विमेन्स इंडियन चैम्बर ऑफ कॉमर्स एंड इंडस्ट्री, जिन्होंने लगातार अलग अलग सब्जेक्ट पे विमेन को अपना वॉइस देने की कोशिश कर रही है और विमेन एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप को बूस्ट और प्रमोट करने की कोशिश कर रही है। उन्हीं काउंसिल, उनके बहुत सारे काउंसिल में से एक काउंसिल है रूरल टूरिज्म, और हम हर मंडे उनके रूरल टूरिज्म काउंसिल्स के कुछ मेंबर के साथ बैठते हैं और डिस्कस करते हैं कि किस तरह से रूरल टूरिज्म को प्रमोट किया जाए। पॉलिसी टाइम्स और विकी के बीच एक सिमिलरिटी मुझे दिखता है कि विकी भी इतना पैशनेट है कि उन्होंने रूरल टूरिज्म जैसे सब्जेक्ट को पिक किया जो थोड़ा सा ड्राई है और कमर्शियली थोड़ा नॉन वायबल है, एंड दैट इज व्हाई not many people touch it. Only people with absolute benevolent attitudes, they only touch upon something like rural tourism. और आज हम रूरल टूरिज्म के दो नेशनल काउंसिल मेंबर के साथ हैं। मैं स्वागत करना चाहूंगा लक्ष्मी शरद जी को और धारणा शुक्ला जी को। दोनों नेशनल मेंबर हैं विकी के रूरल टूरिज्म काउंसिल। लास्ट वीक हमने बात किया था कि रूरल टूरिज्म एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट सेगमेंट है, इंडिया को मैसिव तरीके से एम्प्लॉयमेंट दे सकती है रूरल में, और महिला को भी, और साथ में ये अच्छा खासा रेवेन्यू जनरेट कर सकते हैं। बहुत सारे एरिया के टूरिज्म होते हैं, तो उनमें से रूरल टूरिज्म बहुत एक प्रॉमिसिंग फील्ड है, क्योंकि इंडिया का जो खूबसूरती है वो कहीं ना कहीं गाँव में बसे हैं और उस गाँव की टूरिज्म को हम अक्सर प्रमोट नहीं कर पाते हैं। तो आज का मुद्दा हमने इसलिए रखा कि किस तरह से हम भारत की जो रूरल टूरिज्म है उसको लिटरेचर और स्टोरी टेलिंग के जरिए उसको हम सामने रख पाए। तो मैं सबसे पहले स्वागत करना चाहूंगा हमारे दोनों मेंबर को, और इन राउंड वन आई विल रिक्वेस्ट बोथ ऑफ आवर एक्सपर्ट्स टू काइंडली इंट्रोड्यूस देमसेल्व्स इन 5 मिनट्स। तो मैं सबसे पहले धारणा शुक्ला जी को रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा, ब्रीफली आपका थोड़ा सा परिचय दें, इंट्रोडक्शन। Ma'am, your voice is not audible, I think. No, you are on mute. Okay. I hope I am okay. Lakshmi ji, can you speak? Is it working?
नमस्ते।
Yeah, हाँ. So Lakshmi ji, आप अपना इंट्रोडक्शन दें। धारणा जी, एक बार आपका सिस्टम चेक कर लीजिए।
Namaste, good evening. Thank you so much for having me on this show. It's a pleasure to speak about storytelling and promoting rural tourism, which is something that I'm very passionate about. I'm a media professional. I've been in media for almost 15 years. I've been in TV, radio, and I've been in the business of content creation. 15 years ago, I took a sabbatical from my corporate career after working from I've been writing I've been writing stories, and I've been creating content on television, on radio. I decided that I needed to create content, which is something that, which I'm passionate about, and that was traveling. So 15 years ago, I took a sabbatical, and then I started exploring the places around my own hometown, which is, I live in, I'm from Tamil Nadu, but I live now in Karnataka and Bangalore. But I started exploring South India, I started exploring Tamil Nadu, I started exploring Karnataka. And one of the trips that made a very strong impact in my mind was a trip that I went into rural Karnataka. I went exploring almost 30 villages. And I was on I started exploring, Hoysala temples, These were temples that were over 1,000 years old. They were in small villages. You would find them near lakes, near fields. Some of them had been converted into milk shell booths. In some temples, the villagers would give me the key, and I was mostly a solo traveler, or I would go with my cousin who was younger than me. So there were two girls. People used to be very amused, wondering what we were doing in villages, why we are looking at these local, temples. What is it that we were seeking? I was not a historian or a art historian, but I just wanted to experience the local history, the local culture, the local ambience. I would sit and go into someone's house, talk to them, have chai with them, just discuss their day-to-day life. And I realized that ordinary people had so many extraordinary stories that we never get to hear about. We only see the celebrities, we only see page three, we only see people who media normally talks about. But I realized that not only is the heart of India in these villages, but also that people make places, and these people have so many stories that need to be told. So I started travel writing and I started travel blogging. I was one of the earliest to be a blogger. I started my blog, like I say, it's a very erratic teenager, my blog. It's almost 16 years old. So when nobody knew what blogging was about, I started blogging. I started writing articles. I used to write a column for The Hindu called The Inside Story, where I would talk about these little offbeat experiences that I would have in local temples, local cultures, villages, conversations that I used to have, craftsmen, craftspeople, toys. So there were these experiences gave me a kind of fulfillment that I didn't get in my corporate career. And then I decided that traveling became a way of life for me. I became a storyteller for life. And this journey continues. And I'm so glad to have had an opportunity to be with Vicky, because there's so many stories I feel that I can share. And I can see not just that I can be a storyteller myself, but I can train local guides and local people and take the help of experts to make them storytellers as well. So so in short, that is my introduction. And I'm so happy to be a part of this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, may I come to Dharana ji, kindly.
Thank you, Akram ji. Namaskar.
Mobile horizontally, just to give a bigger frame, 90-degree like move. Just move it 90-degree. Not, for example, that will give a bigger frame. Like if you can place it like this. Yeah, perfect. And you can.
Thank you. Please. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Right. Thank you. Namaste, Akram ji.
Namaste.
So my name is Dharna, and I am actually from hospitality background. So I did my hotel management in 1998, post which I worked with hotels for about 10 years. And then my passion for teaching made me move to teach in universities and colleges, both in India and abroad. So I worked in Dubai as well for quite some time. And post which I came back to India, and I worked as a consultant with Aptech, and we revised their modules at their corporate level in hospitality and tourism. And so I have been primarily into teaching and working in hospitality industry. Currently, I'm doing my PhD in sustainable management of tourism. That's my broad topic. And I've just submitted my thesis, so I'm waiting for my final viva. And so rural tourism is something that is part of sustainability. And way back in 2018, I presented a paper on rural tourism at Jamia Millia Islamia University. And so it kind of, I got attracted to rural tourism through studies, you can say it that way. So this is my background, and so I'm here now.
Thank you so much, Dharna ji, for sharing a brief intro, but really very nice. You were in corporate and you moved to academics, which means a lot of rich knowledge to share with not only students but also to the corporate world. Now, अभी मैं फिर वापस आऊँगा, हम टॉपिक पे आते हैं. हमारा जो एक बेसिक थीम हमने पिक किया है कि किस तरह से हम रूरल टूरिज्म को प्रमोट करें, क्योंकि प्रमोशन मींस हाफ जॉब इज डन, और प्रमोशन इज समथिंग दैट इज मच नीडेड हमारे आज रूरल टूरिज्म को, और खास करके उसका क्या पोटेंशियल है, क्या ब्यूटी है. बिकॉज अक्सर मैं फॉरेनर को देखता हूँ आज जब आते हैं तो दे डोंट वांट टू गो टू आगरा, ताजमहल और द टॉप प्लेसेस. ये कहीं ना कहीं that those are obvious और काफी लोग देख चुके हैं. What they want to see, which is very more organic and unexplored.
Yes.
और इंडिया का जो रियल खूबसूरती है वो एक्सप्लोर करना चाहता है, और कहीं ना कहीं वो हमारे बहुत पुराने मंदिर या बहुत पुराने अलग रिलीजियस प्लेसेस और दूसरे काइंड ऑफ प्लेसेस जो हैं, तो वो बहुत ज्यादा उनको अट्रैक्ट करती है. सो आई वुड रिक्वेस्ट बोथ ऑफ यू टू स्पीक कि टॉपिक को सामने रखते हुए हम रूरल टूरिज्म को हमारे टूरिज्म के वन ऑफ द टॉप मोस्ट एजेंडा कैसे बनाएं, कैसे रूरल टूरिज्म को ना कि सिर्फ इंडिया के सामने, विदेश के सामने भी. तो मैं ये बात इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में कह रहा हूँ कि इंडिया इतनी बड़ी एक देश है, हमारे 135 करोड़ की आबादी है, तो हमारा इंटरनल जो टूरिज्म मूवमेंट है वो फॉरेन टूरिज्म से कुछ कम नहीं है, उससे ज्यादा ही है मुझे लगता है. सो कैसे हम इंटरनल टूरिज्म मूवमेंट भी मैसिव प्रमोट करें, साथ में इंटरनेशनल टूरिज्म को भी अट्रैक्ट करें. और तीसरा, किस तरह से पॉलिसी मूवमेंट्स आप देखते हैं, सरकार की तरफ से किस तरह से मूव आप देख रहे हैं रूरल टूरिज्म को प्रमोशन करने के लिए, प्रमोट करने के लिए, और किस तरह से और बेहतर एफर्ट्स और मूवमेंट होनी चाहिए, कैसे बजट्स होनी चाहिए, और कैसे जो अलग अलग संस्थाएं हैं, जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हैं, एसोसिएशंस हैं, वो उनको सरकार साथ में ले सकती है और साथ में मिलकर एक इकोसिस्टम के फॉर्मेट में हम ज्यादा प्रमोट कर पाएंगे. तो लक्ष्मी जी, क्योंकि वो स्टोरी टेलिंग बैकग्राउंड से हैं, उन्होंने काफी रियल लाइफ स्टोरी एक्सप्लोर किए हैं, तो मैं आपको, क्योंकि आप स्टोरी टेलिंग में भी है, काफी एक्सप्लोर किए हैं, तो आपसे मैं शुरू करता हूँ डिस्कशन, फिर हम कॉर्पोरेट व्यू लेते हैं धारणा जी से. लक्ष्मी जी.
So many years ago, I had gone to Sindhudurg, and there was an organization. They were doing exactly the same thing, that they were trying to create promotion of rural tourism in Sindhudurg. This was almost maybe about 10-12 years ago. I would talk about maybe 2008, 2009, that time when it was very, very nascent and very people didn't understand even what rustic and rural tourism was. This organization was called Culturangan, and they were actually taking this initiative of trying to work with people in villages in Sindhudurg, and also try and help them create homestays, take one of their rooms, make it into a nicer homestay, do nice designing, build. So the idea was also to make the villages, empower them. So they would market it, Culturangan would market it, help them with designing, help them with infrastructure, help them with getting people. But the villages themselves used to create an infrastructure, used to create the experience for the traveler. And I was amazed. First of all, I come from South India. So while I know that there is so much of rich traditions and culture in my own backyard, but I've lived in Bombay all my life. I've studied there, I've worked there, I've been a media person for 5 years, but I've never stepped beyond Bombay and maybe a bit of Pune. And we also go to Goa. But the idea is to suddenly see so much of, such beauty. There was heritage, there was culture, there were ruins of forts, there were ecotourism, there were this concepts of sacred groves there. There was trekking opportunities, there was amazing food. And I remember one very, very, an experience that really, two experiences I would say that really touched me. One experience was that when I was walking into a small village called Pinguli, it was a very small, cute, quaint village. And I met this puppeteer. He had a museum in there. And I asked him, why are you doing it in Pinguli? Why not in any other city? He says, no, this is my home. I want the world to come to Pinguli. I don't want to go to the world. And then he said something. I was asking him about his stories about his back, how he got into puppet and how did he have so many puppets, different kinds of puppets. So he told me a very interesting story. He said his ancestors, grandfathers and great-grandfathers were like, they were performing artists, but they were also spies to the local kings there. So they would go from village to village to village and collect stories and of course be the eyes and ears to the local rulers and then come back and tell them these stories. And he had created this whole museum, keeping in mind all these very interesting aspects of his, ancestral world. In a way, I felt extremely tragic. It's that story lived and died with him, if you know what I mean. It was only, maybe I wrote a few articles here and there, but end of the day, there's no one to carry forward that tradition, that wealth of, rich traditions, stories, folklore, crafts, even those family heirlooms of those puppets. I don't know whether, we would ever see such amazing things in our lives. And I think these are the stories that needs to be told to the world. If you just say, okay, come to my village, let's do rural tourism. I mean, it's interesting. People will go do a village tour, walk around the village. But I believe that people make places. And I think this is a story that really touched me. And that is one of the reasons I started. Whenever I go to any place, I look for people whose stories I want to tell. One more such story in my own state, in Tamil Nadu, actually. And there is down south in Tirunelveli, near Nagarkoil and Tirunelveli, there is a small little village called Tovalai. And Tovalai is known to have the largest flower market, one of the largest flower markets. Like if you go there, it's a wholesale markets there. And there was I had a distant relative who used to be in the crafts council, and she told me about a gentleman who used to do what is called a Manikam Malai. Manikam means rubies in Tamil. Malai is garland. So what he would do every morning, he would go early morning, get a certain kind of flowers. Okay, it's not regular flowers, but a certain type of flowers. And he would know how to weave these flowers in a certain manner. It's not just about doing another, flower garland. He would do it in his own way of doing it, that it looked literally like a garland of rubies. And the Padmanabhapuram temple used to be about an hour away. Every morning, early morning, a vehicle would come from the Padmanabhapuram temple in Trivandrum. It would cross the border, come into Tamil Nadu, take the garland from him, and then it would go to the deity every day. His children and his grandchildren were all educated. He was trying to teach the craft of how to do this particular art and craft of weaving this special kind of garland. So, we all think, oh, flower garland is any garland, but even a craft of weaving a garland can have so many patterns and techniques. And just imagine, like you said, how rich our country is in each region. And if we find a way to market these, to talk about these, get someone to go and experience, spend a day with him, learn that craft, maybe just experiment with it. And just flowers are so beautiful. I mean, this is a story, in my opinion. So the whole idea is that we also need, as media, and as storytellers, we have to figure out stories that we want to take out of the Rural Tourism Initiative and try and see how we can make these stories into, I would call them maybe tours or products, or whatever you call in the tourism parlance, and try and, make them the hook of the entire promotion. That is why I believe that people make places. I mean, there's so many stories, but I think, I don't want to take more of your time.
Thank you. No, we have a lot of time to discuss and understand, and also to take these things to our viewers. I'll come to Dharna ji now. Dharna ji, you come from corporate. Corporate में आपने काम किया, top hotel के साथ आपने काम किया, फिर आपने academic में move किया, आपने teach किया बहुत सारे बच्चों को. जो ट्रेडिशनल और कन्वेंशनल टूरिज्म है हमारे देश का, वो किस तरह से एग्रेसिवली अपना प्रमोशन मार्केटिंग करती है और क्या डिफरेंस है, और रूरल टूरिज्म में अब तक कैसे किया जाता है, और कैसे हम प्रोफेशनल जो मार्केटिंग प्रमोशनल स्ट्रेटजीज हैं वो कैसे अप्लाई करें हमारे रूरल टूरिज्म में, ताकि रूरल टूरिज्म बाकी टूरिज्म जैसे भी काफी फेमस हो. और कहें कि बहुत सारे हमारा, मुझे लगता है वन मोर वे ऑफ promoting is like Taj Mahal is one of the seven wonders of the world. So somewhere kahin hamara rural heritage jo hai, if we can take it to that world level, that okay, so because normally people do Google search, these days, and they see what are the best places to visit in India, and that's how people actually make opinion about different places of their visits and their plan. तो किस तरह से हम हमारे देश के रूरल हेरिटेज को ग्लोबल लेवल में उस तरह से लेके जा सकते हैं, और किस तरह से आप देख रहे हैं, आपका एक्सपीरियंस कैसा रहा है पूरे जर्नी में?
एब्सोल्युटली. अकरम जी, पहले तो पोस्ट पैंडेमिक ये जो हमारा अभी पैंडेमिक चल रहा है, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल आई वुड लाइक टू मेंशन दैट ऑलमोस्ट 70% ऑफ आवर पॉपुलेशन लिव्स इन रूरल एरियाज, एंड स्पेशली इन दीज पैंडेमिक टाइम्स we have noticed that people actually want to visit places which are pristine, which are away from the urban areas, which are not populated, and ये सब हमें कहाँ मिलेगा? we get this in the rural areas. So a lot of people these days are interested in traveling to rural areas, and the government actually needs to take a cue on this, and we need to develop the rural areas so that these areas are visited, and we take away the crowd. We actually take away the people from the majority of the crowded areas to these areas. Let the people experience the rural lifestyle, the rurality of our country, instead of looking at urban areas, for a visit, for a tour, etc. So having said that, because मैं ज़्यादा policies पे और research पे बात करना चाहूंगी. So we need policies to do visitor management, as I just spoke. ज़्यादातर लोग urban areas में जाते हैं, हमको वहां से उनको हटाना है, हमको लोगों को rural areas की तरफ ले जाना है. So that is one thing, and this can also help in preserving our culture and our natural environment, which is present in abundance in the rural areas. So this is one point, and we need policies on developing tourism to increase our economic benefits of tourism, especially in areas with serious issues of social and economic problems. And rural areas mein ye problems zyada hain. So whether it is social, where people cannot, they are not confident of talking to tourists, they are not confident of doing anything because they feel that हमसे ये हो नहीं पाएगा, हम बाहर के लोगों से बात नहीं कर पाएंगे, हम बाहर के लोगों से कैसे हम interact कर पाएंगे. So this is something which is a social problem for the rural people, and they need to overcome that. Second, what I was saying was about the economic problems. As we know, rural areas are an abundance of lot of different things, but these have not been tapped. So ये एक untapped environment है जिसको हमें tap करना चाहिए, और इससे dual benefits हैं. तो tourist के लिए भी benefit है, where they see unexplored places, and it is an advantage for the rural people as well. So they can earn their own living. So one is that they can earn their own living. They get to know the culture of the people outside. So this is another thing. So this is very, very important as well. And then policies also need to control the uneven distribution of tourism in areas, as I spoke. So visitor management karna bahut zaruri hai. So this can also be done as seasonal distribution. So what happens is, जैसे गर्मी में लोग particular places में नहीं जा रहे हैं, so हम ऐसे rural areas tap कर सकते हैं जहां पर जो ये areas हैं, और जहां पर हम उसको डेवलप करके लोगों का फ्लो वहां पर कर सकते हैं. तो इस तरह वो रूरल एरिया भी बेनिफिट होगा, और एक हम डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कर रहे हैं कि कोई भी मास टूरिज्म की तरफ प्लेस ना हो जाए, मास टूरिज्म की वजह से प्लेस स्पॉइल ना हो जाए. So this is something that I wanted to say in terms of policy that we need to work upon in order to untap the rural areas.
Right.
Tap the rural areas. Yes.
Acha, now एक बहुत important. Let us come to a very important aspect, that the future of Indian sectors lie on the involvement and interest of the youth. So we will see all those sectors which or where our youth takes deep interest will flourish, and sectors where our youth will not take interest will gradually fade. That's the normal trend, and this happens everywhere. Now, in that also means that involving and attracting or motivating or inspiring our youth in the ecosystem or promoting rural tourism is absolutely important.
Yeah.
So now you must be working with a lot of, because Dharana ji is working with
Yes.
education institutions, so she's working with the youth, and Lakshmi ji must be in touch with a lot of youth. You must be interacting with them. What kind of reaction or response do you see in the youth when you discuss about rural tourism? How can we attract them more into coming or taking inspiration or taking interest in promoting rural tourism or exploring rural tourism? Lakshmi ji.
So I have met quite a few youth who are very excited about their own hometowns. I've always said that, while we need to give different forms of training, you'll always find that you'll find someone and say, I'll be a guide. They'll give you a local story. They'll take you to a local place. They'll say, I'll show you something which you've not seen before. Most of the guides that I meet are all young people, men, women, kids. And I think if you can train them into being good storytellers, because we need local brand ambassadors. I mean, while we can all be English speaking guides and we can go into the villages, the nuances are lost when when it comes only from the local soil. It can come, you can always have translators, but the actual story, the actual charm of telling a story comes from these local people. And I have seen youth very excited. They always want to be a part of any activity. When you see tourists coming in, I've also seen some really young people who make amazing food, for instance, people who are very good in taking care of guests. So if you like, when I stayed in these homestays, most of them were local people, local, and local craftsmen, local heroes, local storytellers. And if these were actually groomed a little, trained a little, empowered a little, not only are you going to give them employment, but you're also going to make them feel proud of their own village. They don't have to come to a city or the closest town to try and seek for jobs and then not feel good about it. This is their own place, and they feel very empowered and very proud when they tell their stories about their town. So I'll give you a story. For example, I was driving down many years ago, 10-12 years ago, around from Hyderabad to Warangal. I didn't even know about Warangal at that point of time. So a local who's from Warangal actually took me on. He was a driver, so he took me to Warangal today, and then we explored so many villages and so many temples which are all broken and which were all being renovated. One of those temples is Ramappa Temple, which is today got a UNESCO heritage site. If it had not been for that local Salim, who was my driver, who was from that heartland, I wouldn't have even seen it 10-12 years ago. Or for that matter, even Warangal. He was the one who took me stories. There was no ASI guide there. There was no one there. He told me stories about the place. He took me to the place where you can get the best, pesarattu, the moong dal dosa that they make. See, they're very excited when they want to show you around. Unfortunately, we are not tapping their excitement, their knowledge, their sense of parochial pride. And if that is empowered, I am sure, we can, give these rural youth a lot of opportunities. Another story I can tell you is in Mangal Jyoti, for example. This is a very sustainable as well as a responsible tourism story. There, Mangal Jyoti is a small little village on the banks of the Chilka, where a lot of migratory birds come annually. And these birds were poached by the local youth. And an NGO actually trained them. And today, all the youth today have become actually the protectors they're not only are they're naturalists, they're boatmen. They actually protect the birds now. And they are so proud of their visitors. And they openly say, we made a mistake. Years ago, we used to kill them, we used to sell them. But today, they are our guests. We protect them. And they feel very good about taking tourists, telling me that this bird is, they'll give you the entire history of the bird, where it came from, where it's originated, what its habitat is like, so much of knowledge that training has gone into them. So I think we should make local youth into story makers and empower them. And believe me, you don't need any more better brand ambassadors than them.
Excellent. Thank you. Dharnaji.
Sure. Actually, this is one of our recommendations as well to the government. We've recently done a whole points of recommendations to the government. And this has come from our council members, these points. And so this has been one of the points as well that, the local youth should be trained at the local panchayat levels as well. That is where, we can stop them from migrating to the urban areas actually. And secondly, I would like to speak from the education point of view as well. Rural tourism should also be taught as a subject in at the bachelor's level or the master's level of the tourism programs across universities. this is something that will bring an awareness of what rural tourism is, and would probably make the youth excited about visiting these areas, or taking up a profession in these rural areas. So this is something that from the education point of view. And so this is actually what I think about youth being trained. Also, I would at this juncture mention the role of women, because youth is one, definitely, but even young women or even women, empowering of women has come out as one of the major points of these recommendations, what we did with our council members. And women staying at home at these villages can do so much in terms of bringing tourists to the villages, showcasing their culture, what men folk probably cannot do. So this is again, I just wanted to mention the role of women as well, because it's very important alongside the role of the youth as well. So this is my point of view, Akramji.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think I had a separate question for that. Now the question is already answered. So the other perspective I would like to have now, this is a little more technical but serious, is that anything we talk about, the commercial viability of it only makes it success. So even if it is a cigarette or whatever brand you talk about, we need to make the project or the sector or the part commercially viable. Now, when we see the tourism perspective of it, there are many different kinds of tourism which are more commercially viable. Now, how much is rural tourism commercially viable? And how can we make rural tourism more commercially viable for the operator's point of view? Because at the end of the day, there has to be some big world-class operators working in promoting in rural tourism, because they are the ones who will bring a lot of tourists, because they provide the infrastructure support also in the ecosystem. How do we make rural tourism commercially viable? So yeah, maybe Dharna ji can begin. She comes from industry.
Sure. So this is where the involvement of the state and the central governments come in. First of all, they need, there are 3-4 things that will go into this. One is development of the infrastructure, which is very important. We need to connect village to village, so that tourists don't have a problem in commuting to the villages. Secondly, I would say, the financial assistance that can be provided for these villagers to set up their own ventures, small little ventures, at the village level. So this is second thing, what I think. Third thing is where the government can do a lot towards the publicity of these villages. Now, the government can have road shows abroad. They can, use their consulates abroad to talk about village tourism in or rural tourism in specific. They can, even domestically, they can promote domestic tourism, domestic tourists to come to these villages, especially in these pandemic times where we've seen that, international tourism has taken a hit. So domestic tourism can be promoted very well by the government in terms of, bringing people to these rural areas. So this is something that I think can be done in terms for rural tourism to come at par with other forms of tourism as well.
Thank you. Lakshmi.
I believe what Dharnaji said is absolutely right. And I think that it should be made mandatory that every tourism board, every region, every state tourism board should have rural tourism as one of their key initiatives. It should be one of the products that they promote. It could be a village or villages or a cluster of villages closest to the town. For example, if I'm like I said, I come from Tamil Nadu. So if you keep Tanjavur or Kumbakonam as the two main towns, there are so many villages around where one could do a chola trail, where one could do crafts, when one can do food trails. So if you can develop clusters around, there are weaving units there. So if they can focus and make this mandatory, and there are beautiful homestays in some of these places. So that, I believe, is one way of doing it. The second way I also feel is doing it is, while we need to definitely promote it in the international market, I think it's also very important that we focus on backyard tourism. And we have seen in the way with the pandemic, we can't always keep going to exotic destinations. Like last week, I took a couple of days off, and I just went to a farmland just 2 hours away from Bangalore, and I stayed in a tiny little container home in a farm, and it was beautiful. I could see factories where they were making pickles. I could see a lot of work that the farm hands were doing, and there was no one else there, because obviously people don't travel, people don't even know their own backyard. And it was completely like 2 days of switching off from everything. And today I'm actually started researching, and I realized that there are almost 100 places outside Bangalore that I could do as a day trip or as a weekend getaway. And all of these, call it geotourism or backyard tourism or whatever fancy names we want to call it, but I think the idea is that we need to make our city the hub of tourism, and we need to draw, I think, concentric circles around it and promote clusters around. And most of these places, like there are weaving units just 2 hours away. I've gone to Nandi Hills just 1 hour away, and there are weavers out there. You don't really have to go to exotic places to explore. Sometimes there is so much of amazing things in your own backyard. So I think if we can promote backyard tourism, and if local tourism boards make it mandatory to promote their own their own region and clusters of villages around, attach it to the popular towns and do a little circuit or promote around them. The other quick thing that I want to talk is that I know some tourism boards are doing this very well. They do a lot of these large scale fairs and festivals. We've seen how Pushkar has grown into a mega event now. But there are opportunities, I think, even in smaller, like when you go abroad, people get excited to see like a farmer's market. I mean, there are so many what we call locally Sundays here, Sante, we call them. I've gone to a couple of them, and it's so colorful. I don't have to say I always have to go to wait for a Pushkar camel fair. There's so much of life even in my local villages and their farmers market that happens there. So I think, little things, little events, like we in marketing parlance, even when we are in my corporate language, we keep talking about this whole concept of hum, sing, shout, which is a marketing thing. So you don't always have to do one marketing campaign, which is always shouting. You can keep humming all the time and maybe do a little bit of singing sometime. So these little things that we keep buzzing around will kind of probably help to promote your own backyard and the villages around.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will come to the final point of today's evening, and that is, this is the era of digitization. Across India and across the world, whole world will be connected digitally. India will not be an exception, and rural India will also not be an exception. Now, is excessive digitization a threat to rural tourism, or it can be leveraged further in spreading awareness about rural tourism? कैसे हम ये जो एक्सेसिव डिजिटाइजेशन, सब कुछ आज मोबाइल पे है, सब कुछ ऑनलाइन है, ये ऑनलाइन का कैसे हम फायदा उठा पाए रूरल टूरिज्म को प्रमोट करने के लिए? सो या आई थिंक लक्ष्मी जी कैन टच एंड देन धारणा जी कैन कंक्लूड.
I think while over digitization is a problem everywhere, it is a necessary right now. It's a necessary evil, as I call it. And to promote rural tourism, it's absolutely important. We could even do online classes for kids, talking to them about their own backyards and their own villages. When I was researching for another project, I was reading about Italy. And they said that Italians, unlike, when we are as foreigners, when we visit Italy, we want to go to Florence and we want to go to Rome and we want to go to all these historic places. But Italians don't like to travel to their own, these fancy cities, according to them. Fancy, I'm saying it, they have quoted it in that article. So, but what they wanted was to go to their own villages. So there was actually a digital setup where they had actually kind of created apparently a network of villages and infrastructure and hotels and guides and everything to facilitate the domestic travel of Italians in their own villages. Now, if this is something that we could do digitally, it is something which is amazing, because we need, people are, as urbanites, we are also a little skeptical all the time about safety. We are a little skeptical about infrastructure. Why even loos are a problem? We don't know, especially when solo girls like us travel. It's always a little worry that we have, we have to keep looking at our backyard all the time. So if things are a little digital, there's network available everywhere, everything is available, we know which is the closest place to go to if there is any problem, good homestays around, maybe tourist police like somebody had recommended in our recommendations. So these things digitally would be of an amazing help. And today, like you said, the world is moving into a digital framework, and I think our villages should be on that digital map as well.
Thank you. Dharna ji.
Sure. So from my perspective, being online or this digitalization is very important, because from my point of view, we can reach, in terms of hospitality education, we can reach the masses. We can reach the rural people. We can teach the rural people if we are online about, what can be done better in their respective places to attract more tourists to come there. Secondly, what I think is access of digitalization for rural people is important, because, like I said, they can know what better can be done. For example, in terms of hospitality, हम क्या कर सकते हैं कि हम अपने ही विलेज में, अपने ही एरिया में ऐसी चीजें दें जो लोगों को बाहर से अट्रैक्ट करे, लोगों को किसी चीज की कमी ना हो. ये इंफॉर्मेशन कहाँ से मिलेगी उनको? वो ट्रैवल नहीं कर सकते हैं, वो दूर तक नहीं जा सकते हैं. So this information, it will be accessed through the digitalization as we are speaking about. So this is something, and as Lakshmi ji rightly said, collaboration, of the rural people with others through this digital era, is possible through digital era. So this is something that is very important. Digitalization is definitely not a bane; it's a boon for the rural people, and it should be taken forward.
Thank you. So it is a boon and it should be taken forward. So हमारे साथ थे लक्ष्मी जी और धारणा जी. At length हम बात कर रहे थे रूरल टूरिज्म का पोटेंशियल क्या है और यूथ को कैसे हम एंगेज करें, किस तरह से माइग्रेंट लेबर को हम कर सकते हैं. बहुत सारे सजेशंस आया, मे बी इन द कंक्लूडिंग रिमार्क्स आई विल जस्ट रिपीट. और वीमेन को कैसे और ज्यादा एंगेज किया जाए और डिजिटाइजेशन का कैसे फायदा उठाया जाए या लिवरेज किया जाए. I'll now request both of our speakers to give the closing remarks or concluding remarks or any message for our different stakeholders. Like for the government, what would be your message? For common people, what would be your message? For educators or education institutions, what would be for your message? And tour operators or travelers, what would be your message? Starting with Lakshmi ji.
I believe that real India lies in our rural India. In fact, that's our hashtag. We say real India, rural India. So we need to, actually understand and appreciate the real India. And we need to, as travelers, consciously make an attempt to visit places in our own backyards to begin with, and also visit villages wherever we see, to get an understanding of the kind of cultures. But most important, I think we also need to be sustainable travelers. We need to be responsible travelers. We need to keep the environment clean. We shouldn't go there and litter. It's as much as we are talking constantly about sensitizing rural people to urban. I think it's very important that we need to sensitize urban travelers to rural, because it's not like you can go and throw things there. You need to understand and appreciate local culture. You need to be sensitive to their needs. So it is very important that whether you're a tour operator, whether you're a traveler, whether even if you're a government administration, we all have to focus on sustainability and being responsible travel. I think that it has to be the core of any kind of promotion about rural tourism.
Right. Thank you. Dharna ji.
Sure. As Lakshmi ji rightly said, sensitization of tourists is also very important. Apart from, we've been talking about government and we've been talking about other stakeholders of rural tourism. So apart from that, I think the government needs to work towards the infrastructure. They need to connect the villages. They need to train the local youth, as we mentioned, as we discussed as well. women need to come out, very strongly in the rural areas to, start their own, become entrepreneurs, start their own ventures, and digitalization, as we spoke about as well, needs to happen so that villages can get connected to the outside world, attracting more and more tourists. So that's my take on this, Akramji.
थैंक यू सो मच. हमारे साथ थे धारणा शुक्ला जी और लक्ष्मी शरद जी, जो नेशनल मेंबर हैं विकी के रूरल टूरिज्म काउंसिल का, और हम उनसे बात कर रहे थे कि इस तरह से तमाम इश्यूज पे कि डिजिटाइजेशन पे कैसे काम किया जाए, यूथ को कैसे इंस्पायर किया जाए, और एक लंबा उन्होंने एक रिकमेंडेशंस की लिस्ट बनाए और सरकार को भी पेश किए. उम्मीद है कि हमारी सरकार इस पे गौर करें, इसको सीरियसली लें. और रूरल टूरिज्म किसी पर्टिकुलर किसी कम्युनिटी या किसी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के इंटरेस्ट पे नहीं है, ये पूरे देश के इंटरेस्ट पे है. जैसे लक्ष्मी जी कह रहे थे कि असली इंडिया एक्चुअली रूरल इंडिया पे बसती है, और हम अक्सर गलती कर बैठते हैं कि मैसिव अर्बनाइजेशन हो रहा है हमारे देश में. अर्बनाइजेशन इज नॉट अ सोल्यूशन टू पीपल्स प्रॉब्लम इन द फॉर्म्स ऑफ इनकम एंड ऑल. इंडिया, जैसे हम लोग अक्सर क्या गलती करते हैं, वेस्टर्नाइजेशन करते हैं अपने आप को. सो मुझे लगता है ये इसका उल्टा करना चाहिए था. जैसे अक्सर चाइना या वियतनाम या अलग अलग देश वो अपने स्ट्रेंथ पे खेलते हैं, हम लोग कहीं ना कहीं शायद वहां मिस कर बैठते हैं. हमें क्या करना चाहिए कि हमें अपने स्ट्रेंथ पे खेलना है, अपना स्ट्रेंथ को प्रमोट करना है ग्लोबली. और एक्चुअली दुनिया जो है हमारी स्ट्रेंथ देखना चाहती है. द होल वर्ल्ड टुडे वांट्स टू सी इंडिया and our strength, and they want to come to India, they want to explore India, they want to also be partner of India. I have spoken to many foreigners, they really do. अब बात ये कि हम लोग कैसे उसको लिवरेज करें और कैसे उसका फायदा उठाएं. The question is that. तो अगर यहाँ हम कर पाते हैं तो ये तमाम जो चैलेंजेस हमारे सामने हैं, इसको बहुत जल्दी ये ओवरकम हो सकती है, और इंडिया कैन बी वन ऑफ द बेस्ट टूरिस्ट डेस्टिनेशंस ऑफ द वर्ल्ड. तो ये जैसे रूरल टूरिज्म, ये हमारे ओरिजिनलिटी है. इको टूरिज्म को भी हम प्रमोट कर सकते हैं. हमारा जो रिलीजियस प्लेसेस हैं उसको हम प्रमोट करना चाहिए. हमारे 10,000 साल 5,000 साल की पुरानी जो परंपरा है, इतिहास है, उसको कहीं ना कहीं मुझे लगता है प्रमोट करना चाहिए. और वही इंडिया की ओरिजिनलिटी है, वही इंडिया की खूबसूरती है. तो उम्मीद है कि हमारे पॉलिसी मेकर्स और सारे लोग इस बात को समझेंगे. पॉलिसी टाइम्स जो हमेशा कमिटेड है कि इस तरह से प्रोग्राम करें जिससे हमारे देश एक बेहतर देश बन सकती है और जिसके जरिए हम कुछ अपने देश को दे पाए. तो विकी एक सिमिलर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, नहीं तो ये गलती नहीं करते कि उन्होंने रूरल टूरिज्म उठाते और उस पर इतना चर्चा करते. सो हम हमारी उम्मीद करते हैं कि आप इस तरह से सब्जेक्ट्स पे इंटरेस्ट लीजिए और लेट अस वर्क टुगेदर टू मेक इंडिया अ बेटर प्लेस फॉर लिविंग. थैंक यू.